"Ma'am, that man put something in your juice," said the beggar boy to the millionaire client. Dorothy Williams could never have imagined that her Tuesday morning at the Harbour View Cafe in the Upper East Side would be interrupted by an unknown boy bringing a revelation that would change her life forever. At 68, the real estate entrepreneur was accustomed to her routine of drinking fresh orange juice on the terrace of the city's most exclusive restaurant, watching the bustle of Park Avenue while checking her company reports on her tablet. It was at that exact moment the boy appeared beside her, breathless and with wide, panicked eyes. Dorothy almost dismissed him automatically, as she did with all beggars who approached her. But something in the urgency of his voice made her pause with the glass halfway to her lips. "Ma'am, please don't drink that," said Tyler, a boy of about 12, thin and in wrinkled clothes but with sharp eyes that didn't match his disheveled appearance. "I saw everything. That man over there put something in your juice when you weren't looking." Dorothy followed the boy's trembling finger, and her heart froze. He was pointing directly at Richard, her 35-year-old nephew, sitting 3 tables away pretending to read a newspaper. The same Richard who had managed 2 of her biggest companies for the past 5 years. The same Richard who had insisted she come for coffee at this exact place at this exact time. "Boy, are you sure about what you're saying?" Dorothy murmured, trying to keep her voice low as the world seemed to spin around her. Tyler nodded vigorously, tears welling in his eyes. "I was down there, ma'am, collecting cans from the trash when I saw through the restaurant window. The man waited until you went to the restroom and put some white powder in your glass. I ran up the back stairs because I knew something was wrong." Dorothy discreetly observed Richard, who was sweating despite the air conditioning. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the newspaper pages without really reading them. She recognized those nervous signs from when he was a child breaking things around the house. "How did you get in here?" she asked, still processing the information. "Mrs. Gladys from cleaning knows me. Sometimes she gives me spare change when I help her with the heavy trash bags. She has a grandson my age," Tyler explained quickly, his worried eyes never leaving Dorothy's face. "Ma'am, I swear on my grandma's soul, I'm telling the truth." At that moment, Richard stood and began walking toward her table with a forced smile. Dorothy felt her heart race and instinctively pushed the glass away, spilling some of the liquid onto the white tablecloth. "Aunt Dottie," Richard said with exaggerated cheer, "how are you feeling today? I noticed you took a while in the restroom. I was worried." "I'm fine, dear," she replied, watching his expressions carefully. "Just talking to this young man here." Richard glared at Tyler with poorly concealed irritation and nerves. "Aunt, you know you shouldn't pay attention to these street kids. They can be dangerous," he said, reaching for her arm. "Come on, I'll walk you to your car." But Tyler didn't back down. With a courage that impressed Dorothy, the boy stepped between her and Richard. "You forgot something at the ladies' table when she left," Tyler said, staring straight into Richard's eyes. "I saw through the window. You messed with her glass." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You insolent brat! You're making up stories to get money. I'll call security." "Richard," Dorothy said in a firm voice he'd known since childhood, "have a seat." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot since we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The mood at the table grew tense. Richard reluctantly obeyed, but his eyes kept darting between Dorothy and Tyler. The boy remained standing beside her chair, like a little guardian. "Tyler, isn't it?" Dorothy said softly to the boy. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Tyler took a deep breath and began recounting with precise detail. He described how Richard waited for Dorothy to leave, how he looked around to make sure no one was watching, how he pulled a small envelope from his suit pocket and poured its contents into the juice, stirring quickly with the straw. "And it's not the first time I've seen this," Tyler added, his voice growing more confident. "Last week, I saw him do the same thing to an older lady with white hair who used a cane. She drank it all and then got really dizzy. Her kids had to carry her out." Dorothy felt her blood run cold. Mrs. Jenkins, her longtime friend, had mentioned a strange episode the week before when she felt terribly ill after lunch and couldn't remember many details of the day. "Richard," she said, her voice colder than she intended, Do you know Mrs. Margaret Jenkins? Richard's eyes widened for a moment before he tried to regain his composure. No, I don't know any Margaret, he stammered. Strange, Dorothy continued, watching every micro-expression on his face. Because she told me a very kind young man helped her when she fell ill here last week. A tall, dark-haired man with glasses, exactly like you. Tyler nodded vigorously. It was him, ma'am, the same man. The lady with the cane drank it all and then started saying nonsense. She seemed confused, lost. Richard stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. I'm not staying here to listen to ridiculous accusations from some lying brat. Aunt, you're being manipulated. Sit down, Richard, Dorothy ordered in a tone that brooked no disobedience. Now. She then turned to Tyler. Sweetheart, you said this isn't the first time you've seen this. Can you tell me about other situations? Tyler glanced nervously at Richard, who was glaring at him, but Dorothy's encouraging expression made him continue. I've seen it 4 or 5 times, Ma'am. Always older people, always well-dressed. They all acted strange after drinking. Once, a lady even fainted and they had to call an ambulance. Lies, Richard exploded. Aunt, this kid is making all this up to get money. You can't believe him. Dorothy stayed silent for a few seconds, analyzing the situation. Her businesswoman's mind, trained to assess risks and make tough decisions, was working quickly. There were too many details that didn't add up if Richard was innocent. Tyler, she said calmly, where do you live? On the streets, ma'am, he answered without shame. My grandmother got sick and we couldn't pay rent anymore. She passed last month, and I was left alone. Dorothy's heart ached. There was something about the boy's raw honesty that moved her deeply. And how do you get by? I collect recyclables, ma'am. Cans, bottles, cardboard. Sometimes Mrs. Gladys gives me some change when I help her here at the restaurant. I sleep in the stairwell of the building on the corner. Richard scoffed impatiently. Aunt, this is ridiculous. Let's go. You're listening to some street kid who obviously wants to take advantage of your kindness. Richard, answer me one thing, Dorothy said, ignoring his comment. Why did you insist so much on me coming here for coffee today? You've never done that before. I thought it would be good for you to get out of the house for a bit. You've been so isolated lately. And why today of all days? Why not yesterday or tomorrow? Richard hesitated, and Dorothy noticed he was sweating even more. There wasn't any specific reason, Aunt Dottie. It was just an idea I had. Tyler moved closer to Dorothy and whispered, Ma'am, I have something here that might help. He pulled an old, scratched-up phone from his pocket. I found this in the trash last week. It was broken, but I managed to fix it. When I saw what happened to the lady with the cane, I started recording. I have everything on video. Dorothy's eyes lit up, but Richard turned completely pale. This is unacceptable, he exclaimed, trying to grab the phone from Tyler's hands. You can't just film people like that. Tyler was quicker and hid the phone behind his back. I only filmed because I knew something was wrong, he said, looking at Dorothy. My grandma always taught me to help people when they're in danger. Dorothy reached out her hand. May I see it, Tyler? The boy hesitated for a moment, glancing at Richard, who looked like he was on the verge of a breakdown. Ma'am, maybe it's better if we go somewhere more private. Too many people are watching. Dorothy looked around and noticed other diners at the restaurant were starting to pay attention to the argument. Richard had a point there. All right, she said, standing up and grabbing her purse. Let's go to my apartment. It's just a couple of blocks away. Aunt Dottie, I don't think that's a good idea. Richard tried to intervene. You don't know this boy. It could be dangerous bringing a stranger home. Richard, Dorothy said sharply, Tyler warned me about possible danger. So far, he's been more helpful than certain other people. The remark hit its mark. Richard lowered his head, temporarily defeated. On the way to Dorothy's apartment, an elegant penthouse with an ocean view just 2 blocks from the restaurant, she observed the interactions between Richard and Tyler. Her nephew was visibly nervous, checking his phone constantly and making snide remarks about listening to street kids. Tyler, on the other hand, walked in silence, but she noticed how he observed everything around him with sharp, intelligent eyes. He didn't seem intimidated by the wealth surrounding them, just curious and respectful. In the elevator, Dorothy decided to test a theory. "Richard, do you remember the last time we talked about the company's finances?" "Of course, Aunt Dottie. It was last week. You were a little confused about some numbers, but that's normal." "Confused?" Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "I never get confused with numbers, Richard. It's been my specialty for over 40 years. "Oh, I didn't mean confused. I meant tired. You've been working so much lately." Tyler glanced between them, clearly sensing there was something deeper going on. When they arrived at the apartment, Dorothy was struck by Tyler's reaction. Instead of gaping at the luxury, he simply said, "What a beautiful view, Mom. It must be relaxing to wake up to the ocean every day." "It is, dear," she replied, feeling an odd familiarity with the boy. "Do you like the ocean?" "I used to go with my grandma sometimes. She said the ocean teaches patience and wisdom." Richard was pacing nervously around the room, clearly uncomfortable. "Aunt Dottie, I think we should settle this quickly. I have an important meeting in an hour." "What meeting, Richard?" Dorothy asked. "I don't remember scheduling anything for today." It's a meeting I set up about that new project I mentioned to you." "What new project?" Richard seemed even more nervous. "The shopping center project, Aunt Dottie. You signed the papers last week." Dorothy Williams felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't remember signing any papers about a shopping center. "Tyler," she said, keeping her voice calm, "can you show me what you filmed?" The boy nodded and turned on his old phone. The image quality wasn't great, but it was clear enough to see Richard approaching an elderly woman's table, glancing around nervously, and then doing something to her drink. "That's Mrs. Jenkins," Dorothy whispered, recognizing her friend immediately. In the video, Margaret could be seen returning from the restroom, drinking all of her juice, and then starting to look visibly confused and unsteady. Richard reappeared in the frame, offering help and support as if he were a good Samaritan. "There's more," Tyler said, switching to another video. This one showed a similar scene with a different woman, younger, perhaps in her 50s, the same sequence. Richard waiting for the person to leave, tampering with the drink, and then offering help when the victim became disoriented. "My God," Dorothy murmured, feeling her legs grow weak. Richard, who had been watching the videos over her shoulder, finally exploded. "This proves nothing. These images are blurry. They could have been edited. This kid is trying to trick us." "Richard," Dorothy said, turning to face him, "explain to me about the papers I supposedly signed last week." They were just routine documents, Aunt Dottie. Nothing major." "What kind of documents?" "Bank transfers, some authorizations." "You were a little drowsy, said you trusted me to handle the details." Dorothy felt anger rising inside her. Everything was starting to make sense. "Tyler," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "can you show me the other videos?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now, back to the story. As Tyler searched through his phone's files, Dorothy went to her private office and grabbed a folder with documents she'd recently signed. With a sinking heart, she began reviewing the papers. To her horror, she found authorizations for significant transfers to accounts she didn't recognize, changes to life insurance beneficiaries, and even a document granting Richard broad administrative powers in case of temporary or permanent mental incapacity. "Richard," she called, her voice a dangerous whisper. "Come here, now." When he approached, clearly reluctant, she showed him the documents. "Explain this to me." Richard swallowed hard, his hands visibly shaking. "Aunt Dottie, these are just precautionary measures. You're getting older. It's important to have these safeguards. Dorothy stood up, her voice gaining strength. "Or are you systematically stealing from me?" I'd never do something like that." Tyler, who had stayed quiet during the argument, stepped forward timidly. "Ma'am, there's something else I didn't tell you." Dorothy and Richard turned to him. "What is it, son?" "I overheard a conversation he was having," Tyler said, pointing at Richard. He was on the phone outside the restaurant last week after the lady with the cane left. He told someone it's working perfectly and that a few more times and she'd be completely dependent. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard opened and closed his mouth several times like a fish out of water. That's a lie, he finally burst out. This kid is making it all up. Aunt Dottie, you can't believe him. But Dorothy was looking at Richard with an expression he'd never seen before. A mix of betrayal, anger, and deep sadness. Richard, she said slowly, you're my sister's son. I took care of you when your mother couldn't. I gave you a job, trust, responsibility. Why? The simple question seemed to break something inside Richard. He slumped into an armchair, covering his face with his hands. Because I'm desperate, he murmured through his fingers. Desperate how? I owe a lot of money, Aunt Dottie. A lot. To whom? Richard hesitated, but Dorothy's determined expression made him continue. To some loan sharks. I started betting on online games, then casinos. The debts kept growing and they threatened to hurt my family if I didn't pay. Tyler looked from one to the other, starting to grasp the complexity of the situation. How much do you owe? Dorothy asked. $200,000, Richard whispered. Dorothy sat down heavily. It was a significant amount, but not impossible for someone with her wealth. And you thought drugging and robbing me was the solution? I didn't want to hurt you. Richard lifted his head, his eyes red. The substance I use just makes people a little confused, drowsy. It's not permanently harmful. What substance? A doctor friend gave it to me. Said it's used in some psychiatric treatments in very small doses. Just makes people less alert, more suggestible. Dorothy felt a mix of relief and horror. Relief because it wasn't lethal, horror at the systematic betrayal. And what exactly did you do after I took it? Richard lowered his head again. I'd take you home, say you were tired. Then I'd ask you to sign some papers, explaining they were routine. You'd sign without questioning much. And the others? Mrs. Jenkins and the other ladies Tyler saw? They were tests. I needed to know the right dose, how long the effect lasted. I didn't take money from them, I swear. Tyler stepped closer to Dorothy and gently touched her arm. Ma'am, my grandma always said when someone makes a mistake, it's important to give them a chance to make it right. But she also said the person has to really want to fix things. Dorothy looked at the boy, struck by his wisdom beyond his years. And you, Richard? She asked. Do you really want to make this right? Richard lifted his head, and for the first time since the conversation began, his eyes showed something beyond fear and despair, a spark of hope. Yes, Aunt Dottie, I do, but I don't know how. If I don't pay these men in 2 weeks, they said they'll come after my wife and kids. Dorothy fell silent for a long moment, processing everything she'd learned. Tyler stayed by her side, his presence strangely comforting. Tyler, she finally said, you saved my life today, and probably others too. How can I repay you? The boy shook his head. I didn't do it expecting anything, ma'am. My grandma taught me that doing the right thing is reward enough. But you need help, a place to live, food, school. I'll manage, ma'am. I always have. Dorothy's heart tightened at the boy's quiet dignity. What if I wanted to help anyway, not as payment, but because I want to? Tyler looked at her with eyes far too serious for his age. If you want to help, I'll accept, but on one condition. What? That you let me keep helping others too, like I helped you today. Dorothy smiled for the first time since morning had begun. Deal. She turned to Richard. And you? Are you willing to do whatever it takes to fix this mistake? Richard nodded vigorously. Yes, Aunt Dottie. Anything. Then let's start. First, you'll return every cent you took from me. Second, you'll return everything you took from others, even if you think they were just tests. Third, you're going to turn yourself into the authorities and tell them everything. But Aunt Dottie, what about the loan sharks? If I get arrested, I won't be able to pay them back, and they'll come after my family. I'll settle your debt, Dorothy said, but under very clear conditions. What conditions? You're going to enter treatment for gambling addiction. You'll work for me for the next 5 years, earning just enough to support your family decently. Everything else you'd normally earn will go into a special account until you've paid me back for what I covered for your mistakes. And you'll do community service helping other gambling addicts. Richard took a deep breath. And if I accept all this, you won't turn me in. Oh, I will, but I'll go with you. I'll explain the situation, have a lawyer represent you and support your recovery. The difference is, you'll face the consequences like a man, not like a fugitive. Tyler listened silently, but Dorothy noticed the look of approval on his face. And you, Tyler, she continued, do you have any thoughts on this? I think you're being fair, he said. My grandma always said real punishment should help a person grow, not just hurt them. Richard looked at the boy with a strange expression. Why are you defending a solution that helps me? After everything I tried to do? Tyler shrugged. Because everyone deserves a second chance. And because I saw you crying for real. People who cry for real can change. The comment struck Richard deeply. He stood up and walked over to Tyler. Kid, I owe you an apology. And a lot more than that. You don't owe me anything, Tyler replied. But if you want to do something good, help other people like Mrs. Dorothy is helping you. Dorothy watched their interaction with a strange feeling growing in her chest. It was like she was seeing something bigger taking shape. Tyler, she said, can I ask you a personal question? Of course, ma'am. How did you learn to be so wise? The boy smiled sadly. My grandma used to say that when you go through hard times, you can choose to grow bitter or grow stronger. She chose to grow stronger and taught me to do the same. And where did your grandma learn that? She worked for a family when she was young. The lady of the house was very kind and taught her things. My grandma always said real wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you do with what you have. Dorothy felt her eyes well up. There was something in the boy's simple philosophy that touched a part of her that had been asleep for years. Tyler, would you like to live here with me? Ma'am? I have a guest room I never use. You could study, have a normal kid's life, but keep helping me with special projects. What kind of projects? Dorothy glanced at Richard, then back at Tyler. Projects to help people like Mrs. Jenkins and others who might be getting scammed. You have a special talent for noticing when something's wrong. Tyler thought for a moment. And could I keep helping other street kids too? Of course, in fact, that could be part of the project. Then I accept, Tyler said with a shy smile. Richard, who had been listening quietly, cleared his throat. Aunt Dottie, can I suggest something? What? What if we started an official organization, a non-profit to protect seniors from scams and help street kids at the same time? Dorothy raised an eyebrow, surprised. Explain. Tyler here has an amazing eye for spotting shady situations, and he knows street life better than any adult. At the same time, you have the resources and business experience. I could use my knowledge of the scams I've pulled to help prevent others from doing the same. Tyler looked intrigued. How would that work? We could train street kids to be special observers in places where seniors are often targeted by scammers. They'd get a small income for it, have access to education and social services, and at the same time they'd be helping protect vulnerable people. Dorothy Williams fell silent, considering the idea. It's interesting, she admitted, but how do we make sure we're not just exploiting these kids? By making their education and well-being the top priority, Tyler said, and always making it clear they can walk away anytime. And how do we keep them from becoming professional spies instead of just kids? Richard thought for a moment. By limiting the time each child spends on this work. Say no more than 2 hours a day, and only after they finish school and leisure activities. Dorothy stood and walked to the window, gazing at the bay. The idea had potential, but it needed careful structure. Tyler, what do you think? I think it could work, ma'am, but it has to be handled with care. Street kids have already been through a lot. They can't be hurt again. And would you be willing to help coordinate something like this? If you teach me how, yes. Dorothy turned to Richard. And you? Would you be willing to use your scam experience constructively? Yeah, Aunt Dottie. Honestly, it'd be a way for me to start making up for the mess I made. Language, Richard, Dorothy scolded automatically, though there was a hint of humor in her voice. Sorry, Aunt Dottie, for the mistake I made. Tyler laughed, and the sound eased some of the lingering tension in the room. So it's settled, Dorothy said. We'll create this organization. But first, Richard, you need to sort out your legal situation. I know, Aunt Dottie. I'm ready. And Tyler, you need to settle in here and start studying properly. Yes, Mom. And all of us need to learn to work together despite the unusual circumstances that brought us here. The three fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts about how drastically their lives had changed in just a few hours. Mrs. Williams, Tyler finally said, can I ask you something? Of course, dear. Why are you being so kind to me, and even to him? He gestured toward Richard. You don't know me, and he tried to hurt you. Dorothy sat back down, carefully considering her answer. Tyler, remember when you said your grandmother taught you that true wealth is in what we do with what we have? Yeah, I've spent most of my life accumulating money and property. I built an empire, yes, but in the process I became a very lonely woman. I have no children, few real friends, and until this morning, I thought the only family I cared about was stealing from me. She paused, swallowing emotion. When you warned me about the danger, you didn't just save my life. It was like you woke me up to what I'd become, a rich but empty woman. You're not empty, Tyler said gently. If you were, you wouldn't have believed me. And you wouldn't be giving me a second chance, Richard added. Dorothy smiled. Maybe it's the two of you who aren't empty, and maybe that's what I need in my life. Tyler stepped forward and, to everyone's surprise, including his own, hugged Dorothy. My grandma always said family isn't just blood, it's heart too. Dorothy felt tears in her eyes for the first time in years. Your grandmother was a very wise woman, Tyler. Yeah, she was, and I think she'd be happy knowing you're helping me now. Richard approached hesitantly. Aunt, I know it'll take a long time for me to earn back your trust, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying. I know you will, Richard, and I'll be here to help you. But first, let's resolve this situation with the loan sharks and the law. How do we do that? Dorothy was already slipping back into her businesslike manner. First, you'll give me all the names and contacts of those loan sharks. Second, we'll go to my lawyer and tell them everything. Third, I'll pay off your debt, but through the lawyer so it's all documented. Fourth, you'll turn yourself in to the authorities voluntarily. What if the loan sharks won't accept payment through a lawyer? Then we'll have to involve the authorities anyway. Would you rather deal with the law or criminals who threaten your family? Richard nodded in agreement. The law. Definitely the law. Good. Tyler, do you want to come with us to the lawyer? Your testimony will be important. Of course, Mom, but can I ask for one thing? What? After we sort all this out, can we go back to the restaurant? I want to thank Mrs. Gladys for letting me in today. Dorothy smiled. Of course. And I'd like to get to know this Mrs. Gladys better. Seems like she's played an important role in your life. She has. After my grandmother passed, she was one of the few people who stayed kind to me. Then she deserves our gratitude too. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the weeks that followed, the lives of all three changed in ways none of them could have imagined. Richard, accompanied by Dorothy and the best criminal defense attorney in New York City, turned himself into the authorities and confessed to all his crimes. To everyone's surprise, the district attorney, impressed by his voluntary cooperation and the fact that Richard had returned all the stolen money, offered a plea deal. He would serve 2 years under house arrest with an ankle monitor, followed by 3 years of probation with mandatory community service. Tyler adjusted to life in Dorothy's apartment with an ease that amazed everyone. He enrolled in a nearby private school where he quickly stood out for his intelligence and maturity. In the evenings, he helped Dorothy plan the new organization. The NGO was officially registered as Wisdom Guardians, and began its operations 3 months after that fateful morning at the restaurant. The concept was simple. Children in vulnerable social situations were trained to observe and report suspicious activities involving the elderly, while also receiving education, meals, and psychological support. The organization's first official operation took place when Tyler, now wearing his new school uniform, was having a milkshake at the same Harbor View cafe where it all began. He noticed a middle-aged man systematically approaching elderly women sitting alone, offering can't-miss investment opportunities. Using the small communication device Dorothy had given him, Tyler discreetly alerted the team. Within 15 minutes, a group from the NGO, a social worker, a lawyer, and a psychologist arrived on the scene. They didn't confront the scammer directly, but instead approached the potential victims, offering information about common scams and leaving the organization's contact cards. The man, realizing he was being watched, quickly left the cafe. "It was perfect," Dorothy told Tyler that evening as they reviewed the operation report. "We didn't accuse anyone unfairly, but we protected potential victims. And the best part is the ladies were grateful for the information," Tyler added. "One of them even said she'd share it with her bridge club friends. Richard, who was serving his house arrest in Dorothy Williams' own apartment in a separate room, listened to the conversations with a mix of admiration and remorse. His experience as a scammer proved valuable in anticipating the tactics other criminals might use. "Aunt," he said during one of the planning meetings, "there's something I think you should know about scammers." "What?" Dorothy asked. "They rarely work alone on more elaborate schemes. They usually have a network, someone to identify targets, someone to carry out the scam, someone to launder the money, sometimes even corrupt doctors or lawyers involved." Tyler became interested. "So when we find one, there might be others nearby." "Exactly. And they might be watching us too if they realize we're interfering with their business." Dorothy grew thoughtful. "That means we need to be more careful and maybe more strategic." "How so?" "Instead of just reacting when we find scammers, we should investigate the networks behind them, but always in cooperation with the authorities. That's how Operation Safety Net was born. Through partnerships with the Detective Bureau and the District Attorney's Office, the Wisdom Guardians began mapping out scam schemes targeting seniors across New York City. Tyler became a sort of junior consultant, using his street-smart experience to identify suspicious behavior patterns. Other kids started joining the program, all voluntarily and always with the support of their families or guardians. One of them was Madison, a 13-year-old girl who had spent 2 years living with her grandmother in the Upper East Side after losing her parents in an accident. She had a photographic memory and could recall details others missed. Another was Jack, a 14-year-old boy who had grown up in Greenwich Village, observing the flow of tourists and locals. He had a special talent for spotting when someone was pretending to be something they weren't. "It's like theater," he explained to Dorothy during one of their first meetings. "Honest people behave one way. People who are lying behave differently. You learn to see the difference when you need to survive on the streets." The team's first big breakthrough came 6 months after operations began. Madison noticed the same man appearing at 3 different restaurants in Upper Manhattan, always approaching well-dressed elderly women with the same story about being a doctor and offering alternative treatments for arthritis and other common age-related ailments. "He's not a real doctor," Madison reported during a team meeting. "I noticed he uses the same technical terms every time, like he memorized them. And when one lady asked a more specific question about anatomy, he quickly changed the subject." Tyler agreed. "And I saw him getting out of a different car at each restaurant. On Monday it was a black Camry, on Tuesday a silver Accord, on Thursday a white Corolla. Either he owns a lot of cars or he's trying not to be recognized." Jack added his observation. "He always asks to see the ladies' documents to check if they have adequate health insurance. But I saw him photographing the documents with his phone when they weren't looking." Dorothy frowned. Photographing documents? That could be for identity theft or to uncover financial information. Richard, participating via video conference from his house arrest, added, "He's probably profiling the victims, figuring out who has more money where they live if they live alone. It's a slow process, but very effective. What do we do? Tyler asked. Dorothy thought for a moment. Let's set up a coordinated operation, but this time we'll work directly with the police from the start. Operation Fake Doctor, as it was internally known, was meticulously planned. For 2 weeks, the children from the NGO observed and documented the fake doctor's behavior patterns, always keeping a safe distance and reporting their findings through the devices provided by the organization. They discovered he worked with at least 2 accomplices, a woman posing as a nurse who accompanied him on house calls, and an older man who presented himself as a natural medicine specialist and sold unapproved FDA products at exorbitant prices. The scam worked like this. The fake doctor would approach elderly women in public places, offer free consultations, and then suggest specialized treatments that could only be done in the victim's home. During the house visits, the fake nurse would distract the victim while the doctor photographed important documents, scouted the home for valuables, and administered substances that left the person drowsy and confused. Then, the third accomplice would show up offering extremely expensive, natural medicines that supposedly cured all the victim's ailments. In their drug-induced confusion, the elderly women often signed checks or even made bank transfers. It's a much more sophisticated scheme than mine, Richard admitted during one of the planning meetings, and far more dangerous because they have access to the victims' homes. How many people do you think have already been affected? Dorothy asked. Tyler checked his notes. Just in the last 2 months, we've seen him approach at least 15 different women, and those are only the ones we witnessed. And we don't know how long they've been doing this, Madison added. Jack raised an important point. How do we protect the women already being scammed without tipping off the criminals that they're being watched? Dorothy came up with the solution. We'll run a coincidental educational campaign. The NGO will host free seminars on how to spot elderly scams at senior centers, churches, and other places these women gather. We'll distribute informational materials that specifically include the scams you've observed. What if one of the victims recognizes the scammer's descriptions? Tyler asked. Then she'll seek help, and will be ready to provide legal and psychological support. The strategy worked better than anyone had imagined. In the first week of seminars, 3 women came to the NGO reporting they'd been approached by people matching the exact descriptions provided. One of them, Mrs. Eleanor, 72 years old, even arrived at the NGO with her daughter, visibly upset. I thought it was just luck, she explained to Dorothy during the session. Such a kind doctor offering free help for my arthritis, but after the seminar you held at my church, I started to suspect. What exactly happened, Mrs. Eleanor? Dorothy asked gently. He came to my house 3 times. The first time he said he needed to examine my environment to see if anything was worsening my condition. The second time, he brought a nurse who gave me a calming tea before the exam. The third time, Mrs. Eleanor hesitated, looking at her daughter. The third time I felt very strange after the tea. Kind of out of it, you know. And they convinced me to sign some papers I don't even remember clearly. They said it was authorization for a special treatment. Mrs. Eleanor's daughter, a woman around 45 named Cynthia, was visibly angry. Mom, why didn't you tell me any of this? Because they said it was supposed to be a surprise, that when the treatment was over I'd be completely cured and could surprise the whole family. Dorothy Williams exchanged a meaningful glance with Tyler, who was present at the meeting taking notes. Mrs. Eleanor, do you remember what papers you signed? Not very well. Everything was so confusing in my head, but I remember one of them had big numbers, money amounts. Cynthia paled. Mom, let's check your bank account. Now. What they discovered was devastating. Mrs. Eleanor had signed authorizations for 3 bank transfers, totaling $45,000, nearly all of her retirement savings. My God, Cynthia whispered. How did they manage to do this? Dorothy patiently explained how scammers used substances to impair their victims' judgment and how they preyed on the trust and vulnerability of elderly people. But is there any way to get the money back? Mrs. Eleanor asked, her eyes filled with tears. We'll try, Dorothy promised. But first, we need to involve the authorities. And we need to do it in a way that keeps you and other potential victims safe. It was Tyler who suggested the strategy that ended up being decisive. What if we made the criminals come to us, instead of chasing after them? How do you mean? Dorothy asked. We could set up a situation where they think they've found the perfect victim, but it's actually a trap. Richard, participating in the meeting via video call, grew excited. That could work. Scammers always look for specific targets, lonely seniors with money who seem vulnerable. But who would be the bait? Cynthia asked. Dorothy smiled. Me. Ma'am, Tyler protested immediately. It's too dangerous. Not if I'm prepared, and if you're all protecting me. How? We'll set up an operation where I pose as a lonely, wealthy senior, visiting the same places they hunt for victims. You'll be watching from a distance, and the police will coordinate everything. Cynthia shook her head. It's too risky. What if something goes wrong? Then at least we'll have tried, and it's better than letting them keep targeting innocent people like your mom. Mrs. Eleanor, who had stayed quiet during the discussion, spoke up. I want to help too. Everyone turned to her, surprised. Mrs. Eleanor, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted Dorothy with surprising determination. They tricked me, stole from me, and probably did the same to others. I want them to pay for what they did. But how could you help? I can pretend I still believe them. Say I want more treatment sessions. When they come, you'll be waiting. Tyler looked at her with admiration. That's very brave of you. Son, when you reach my age, you learn that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are. Operation Counterstrike was planned over 3 intense weeks. The Detective Bureau assigned a team specializing in crimes against seniors to coordinate the operation. Mrs. Eleanor contacted the scammers, pretending to be eager to continue the treatment, and scheduled a new session at her home. Dorothy positioned herself at a cafe near Mrs. Eleanor's house, dressed to look like a lonely, well-off elderly woman. Tyler and the other kids from the NGO were spread throughout the neighborhood, watching and communicating through small earpieces connected to the police command center. Madison was inside a surveillance van, disguised as a delivery vehicle, using monitoring equipment to track everything happening inside Mrs. Eleanor's home, which had been previously outfitted with cameras and microphones. Jack was positioned at a bus stop where he could observe the entire street, ready to alert the team about the criminal's arrival or any suspicious activity. At 2:30 p.m. on a sunny Tuesday, the scammers arrived at Mrs. Eleanor's house in a silver Accord, the same car Tyler had seen before. They matched the children's descriptions exactly. A man around 50 posing as a doctor, a woman in her 40s pretending to be a nurse, and an older man carrying a briefcase with supposed medications. Targets confirmed, Jack whispered into the mic. 3 people, silver car, license plate ending in 847. Copy that, replied the voice of the lead detective overseeing the operation. Stand by for the signal. Inside the house, Mrs. Eleanor played her role as a trusting victim perfectly. She greeted the criminals warmly and led them to the living room, where the monitoring equipment was installed. Doctor, I'm so eager to continue our treatment, she said, following the script they had rehearsed. I felt amazing after our last session. The fake doctor smiled, clearly pleased. That's wonderful to hear, Mrs. Eleanor. Today we'll perform an even more advanced procedure. But first, my assistant will prepare that special tea to help you relax. The fake nurse went to the kitchen, where she began mixing the substance they used to disorient their victims. What she didn't know was that every move was being recorded and analyzed by the police. Madison, can you see everything? Tyler asked over the mic. Perfectly, she responded from the van. The woman is stirring a white powder into hot water, probably the same substance they used before. At the nearby cafe, Dorothy noticed a 4th man they hadn't seen earlier. He was sitting in a car on the corner, clearly keeping watch. We have a 4th suspect, she discreetly reported. Young man, maybe 30, in a blue Civic on the corner. Understood, the detective replied. Team 2, can you intercept the lookout? Affirmative. Moving into position. Inside the house, the situation was reaching its climax. The fake nurse returned with the tea, but Mrs. Eleanor, following instructions, pretended to take only a sip before excusing herself to use the bathroom. There, she discreetly poured the rest of the tea into the toilet and returned to the living room, feigning drowsiness. "My, this tea is really relaxing," she said, slurring her words slightly. The fake doctor and nurse exchanged satisfied glances. "Excellent, Mrs. Eleanor. Now we'll need you to sign some documents to authorize the next phase of treatment." That's when he pulled out the papers they had prepared, authorizations for even larger bank transfers, this time totaling $80,000. "Now," the detective said over the radio, "all teams, execute." What followed was as coordinated as a ballet. Police units stormed the house from the front and back simultaneously, while other squad cars blocked all exits on the street. The lookout in the blue Civic tried to flee, but was intercepted by the second team before he could even start the car. Inside the house, the three scammers were caught completely off guard. The fake doctor tried to destroy the fraudulent documents but was restrained before he could succeed. "You're under arrest for fraud, criminal conspiracy, and using substances to facilitate crimes," the detective announced as the handcuffs were put on. "This is a mistake," the fake doctor protested. "We're legitimate healthcare professionals." "Oh, really?" the detective replied, showing the papers that had been seized. "Then explain these bank transfer documents that have nothing to do with medical treatment." Outside, Tyler and the other kids watched everything with a mix of relief and satisfaction. They had managed to stop the criminals without anyone getting hurt. "We did it," Jack said, grinning widely. "We really did it." "It was teamwork," Madison added. "Everyone played their part perfectly." Dorothy Williams approached the group, equally pleased. "You were amazing, all of you." "And Mrs. Eleanor too," Tyler reminded them. "She was very brave." Mrs. Eleanor, who was leaving her house accompanied by her daughter and the officers, walked over to them. "Kids, I don't know how to thank you. You helped me regain my dignity." "You helped yourself, Mrs. Eleanor," Tyler replied. "We just gave support." "What now?" Cynthia asked. "What happens to the money my mom lost?" The detective, who had joined the group, answered, "We found evidence of bank accounts used by the criminals to launder the stolen money. We'll likely recover at least some of it, but it'll take a few months." "And in the meantime?" Mrs. Eleanor asked, worried. Dorothy spoke up immediately. "In the meantime, you don't need to worry about a thing. The NGO will make sure you have all the support you need." "But I can't accept charity." "It's not charity, Mrs. Eleanor. It's justice. And besides, we'd like you to consider working with us." "Working how?" "By giving talks to other seniors about how to spot and avoid scams. Your experience, combined with your courage, could help so many others." Mrs. Eleanor thought for a moment. "I accept, but on one condition." "What's that?" "That these kids keep working with us too. They have a special talent for this." Tyler smiled. "We'd love to keep going. Right, guys?" Madison and Jack enthusiastically agreed. 3 months later, the Wisdom Guardians had become a national reference in protecting seniors from scams. The story of Operation Counterstrike was featured in newspapers and TV shows, bringing visibility to crimes against the elderly. Tyler, now 13, had become the most famous young person in the US in senior protection. He gave TV interviews, spoke at public safety conferences, and even wrote a children's book about how to be a hero in everyday life. But what made Dorothy proudest was seeing how he remained humble and focused on helping others. "Tyler," she said during one of their nightly talks, which had become a tradition, "do you ever regret leaving the simple life you had before?" "Ms. Dorothy, I never had a simple life," he replied, smiling. "Life on the streets is very complicated. Now I have a life full of purpose. It's different." "And don't you miss just being a normal kid?" "I am a normal kid. Just a normal kid who happens to have an important job." Dorothy laughed. "You're right. And what do your school friends think about all this?" At first they were impressed, but now they're used to it. Some even asked to visit the NGO. I think we'll have more volunteers soon. "And Richard, how do you feel about him now?" Tyler thought before answering. "I think he proved people can change. He made terrible mistakes, but he's working hard to make things right. And it's helping so many people now. Richard had served his house arrest impeccably and was now working full-time for the NGO, coordinating the social reintegration program for reformed con artists. His insider knowledge of criminal schemes had proven invaluable in developing prevention strategies. "And what about you, ma'am?" Tyler asked. "Do you regret believing me that day?" Dorothy smiled, remembering how her life had completely changed since that morning at the Harbor View Cafe. "Tyler, that was the best day of my life. Not because I was almost poisoned, but because I met you, and because I learned that true wealth really lies in what we do with what we have. You've done so much with what you had. You've helped hundreds of people. We've helped hundreds of people, Tyler, and I hope we can help hundreds more." "Thousands," Tyler corrected. "The program is already being implemented in Chicago, Philadelphia, and Boston. Soon it'll be nationwide. And who knows, maybe worldwide. Why not? Scammers exist everywhere, and so do observant kids." Dorothy got up from the armchair where she was sitting and walked to the window, gazing at the sea shimmering under the moonlight. "Tyler, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Have you ever thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" Tyler laughed. "Ma'am, I think I already am what I want to be. I'll just keep being it, only bigger." "A wisdom guardian." "A wisdom guardian." Dorothy turned to look at him, her heart swelling with maternal pride. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you." "I know," Tyler replied simply, "and I think she'd be proud of you too." "Why?" "Because you chose to be a better person. My grandmother always said that's the hardest and most important thing anyone can do." Dorothy felt her eyes well up, as they often did since Tyler had come into her life. She really was a very wise woman. She was, and I think part of her lives on through the good things we do. Just then, the phone rang. It was Madison, urgency in her voice. "Mrs. Dorothy, sorry to call so late, but there's a situation that needs our attention." "What happened, Madison?" "We got a tip about a new scam. Con artists are posing as phone company employees and convincing seniors to make bank transfers to update their plans." Dorothy looked at Tyler, who was already getting up from the couch, fully alert. "How many victims so far?" "At least 5 that we know of. But there could be many more." "All right. Tomorrow morning we'll organize an emergency meeting. Can you let Jack and the others know?" "Already did. Everyone will be there at 8. After Dorothy hung up, Tyler walked over to her. "Another mission, huh? Another mission. Are you ready?" "Always. And you?" Dorothy smiled, feeling the familiar adrenaline of a challenge. "Always ready too. After all, we're wisdom guardians." "That we are. And wisdom teaches us there are always more people to protect. And that it's always worth trying." Tyler nodded in agreement. "Always worth trying." The next morning, the Wisdom Guardians team gathered at the NGO's office, which now occupied an entire floor of a commercial building in the Upper East Side. Besides Tyler, Madison, and Jack, the group had grown to include 8 more kids and teens, all with similar stories of resilience and all dedicated to protecting vulnerable seniors. The tip about the new phone scam had come from Mrs. Jenkins, the same woman who had been Richard's victim months earlier. Now she was an active volunteer for the NGO and one of the most effective speakers in their education program. "What exactly is happening, Mrs. Jenkins?" Dorothy asked during the meeting. "Yesterday afternoon I got a call from someone claiming to be from the phone company. They said my plan was outdated and that I needed to transfer $50 to activate the new benefits." Tyler took notes. "And you suspected right away?" "Of course. After everything I've learned here, anything involving money transfers over the phone puts me on alert. But I played along to get more information." "What kind of information?" Madison asked. "They asked for my personal details, credit card number, and wanted me to download an app on my phone to make the process easier." Jack perked up. "What app?" "Something with a name that sounded official, but I'd never heard of it. They really pushed me to download it." Richard, who was attending the meeting as a specialist consultant, raised his hand. "That kind of app usually gives them full access to the victim's phone. They can see messages, banking apps, everything. And the most concerning part," Dorothy added, "is that if they're specifically targeting seniors, They've probably already identified people who are less tech-savvy. How can we investigate this without exposing ourselves? Tyler asked. Madison came up with the idea. What if we created fake senior profiles on social media and waited for them to reach out? That's risky, Jack considered. What if they figure out the profiles are fake? Then we make them really convincing, with photos, post history, friends, everything detailed. Dorothy grew thoughtful. It's a good idea, but we'll need police approval. We can't do this alone. And while we organize that, Tyler suggested, how about we launch an immediate alert campaign? Calls to all the seniors in our database warning them about this new scam. Excellent idea, Mrs. Jenkins agreed. And I can help with the calls. Seniors trust it more when it's another senior talking. Operation Secure Phone was implemented on 2 fronts. While Madison worked with cyber police to create convincing fake profiles on social media, Tyler coordinated a preventive calling campaign for over 500 seniors in the NGO's database. The results were staggering. In just 3 days, they received 47 reports of similar scam attempts, including 12 cases where seniors had already lost money. This is much bigger than we thought, Dorothy remarked during a follow-up meeting. We're dealing with an organized scheme probably involving dozens of people. And they're getting more sophisticated, Richard observed. Some reports mention the scammers knew personal details about victims that could only have come from social media or data leaks. Tyler checked his notes. I have a list of company names the scammers claim to represent. Some are real, others completely made up. And all the calls came from the same number? Jack asked. No, that's the interesting part. At least 15 different numbers were used, but when we checked, most turned out to be fake, generated by computer programs. Madison brightened. That's good for us. It means they're using technology, and technology leaves traces. How so? Mrs. Jenkins asked. Everyone who uses these programs to generate fake numbers needs internet, computers, and usually pays for these services. Cyber police can track that, and that's exactly what happened. The fake profiles Madison created worked perfectly. In less than a week, she'd been contacted by 3 different scammers, all using variations of the same script. What they discovered was surprising. The criminals operated from a disguised office in the city center, with at least 20 employees working in shifts to make calls to seniors across the state of New York. It's like a telemarketing company, but for crime, the cybercrime detective explained during a joint meeting. They have targets, supervisors, even a customer service department for when victims call back with questions. And how do they get the seniors' data? Dorothy asked. Some comes from data leaks at legitimate companies, some they buy from other criminals, and some they collect from the victim's own social media. Tyler raised his hand. So how can we stop this? With a coordinated operation. But this time it'll be bigger than anything we've done before. Operation Scam Central involved 3 different precincts: the District Attorney's Office, the Detective Bureau, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The NGO Wisdom Guardians provided technical consulting and logistical support, but the operation itself was entirely led by the authorities. On the day of the raid, Tyler and the other kids from the NGO watched from an improvised command center as the police simultaneously stormed the scammer's office and 4 residences where secondary cell phones for the scheme were operating. The results were spectacular. 23 arrests, seized computer equipment, and evidence of over 1,000 victims across the state. We did it again, Jack said, watching the arrest footage on the monitors. But there's a difference this time, Madison pointed out. What? Tyler asked. We didn't even have to expose ourselves. It was all through investigation and technology. Dorothy, who had been watching alongside them, smiled proudly. You're evolving, learning that you don't always have to put yourselves at risk to help people. But we're still willing to take risks when necessary, Tyler made clear. I know, and I hope it's never necessary. Mrs. Jenkins, who had followed the entire operation from the start, approached the group. Kids, you saved hundreds of people today, hundreds of families who won't go through what I went through. It was teamwork, Mrs. Jenkins, Tyler replied. You did your part too. We all did our part, she agreed. And that's what makes it all possible. 6 months later, the Wisdom Guardians NGO had become an international reference. Delegations from other countries regularly visited the US to learn about the program, and Tyler had been invited to speak at the International Social Protection Organization about senior protection. But for him, the most special moment had happened on a simple Saturday afternoon when he visited a nursing home in Brooklyn to give a talk on digital safety for seniors. After the presentation, a woman around 80 years old approached him. "Young man, can I tell you something?" "Of course, ma'am. My grandson is your age, but since his parents divorced, he's been a little lost without direction. Could you talk to him?" Tyler smiled. "Absolutely. But can I suggest something better?" "What?" "How about he comes to check out our NGO? We always need young volunteers, and helping others is a great way to find direction in life." The woman smiled, her eyes shining. "Do you think he'd be interested?" "If he's anything like you, I'm sure he would." That's how Charles, Mrs. Louise's grandson, became the newest member of the Wisdom Guardians, and through him, other young people began taking interest in the program. In no time, the NGO had expanded to include not just at-risk youth, but also middle-class teenagers who wanted to make a difference in society. "We created something much bigger than we imagined," Dorothy commented to Tyler during one of their nightly conversations. "You created it, Mrs. Williams. I just helped." "Tyler, how many times do I have to tell you that you were the one who started all this? If you hadn't had the courage to warn me that day—" Okay, Tyler laughed. "We created it. Together. That's better. And now, what's next?" "Well, we got an invitation from the Chicago city government to implement the program there. And there's a university in Philadelphia that wants to study our methodology to create an undergraduate course in preventive social protection." "And you, personally, what's next?" Tyler grew thoughtful. "I'll be 15 next year. I was thinking about starting to study for college entrance exams." "What do you want to study?" "Law, to better understand the laws and help more people." "That's a great choice. And after college?" "I don't know. Maybe keep working with elder protection, or maybe expand to other areas. There are so many people who need protection beyond the elderly." Dorothy nodded. "Children, women in domestic violence situations, immigrants?" "Exactly. But one thing at a time. First, we need to solidify what we've already started." "Very wise. And Richard, how do you see his future?" "I think he found his purpose in life. Yesterday, he told me he's writing a book about overcoming gambling addiction. It could help a lot of people. And is he doing well with his family?" "Yes, his wife says he's a completely different man now, and his kids are proud of the work he does with the NGO." "Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom to discover who they really are," Dorothy observed. "True. And sometimes they need someone to believe in them to change. Like you believed in me that first day." Tyler smiled. "Mom, you were being poisoned. It wasn't about believing, it was about acting. But you could have just called the police or pretended you didn't see anything." "I could have. But my grandmother taught me that when you see someone in danger, you don't think twice. You act. Your grandmother raised you well. She did. And now I'm trying to teach other kids the same." Dorothy stood and walked to the shelf where she kept a photo album of the NGO. She brought it over to show Tyler. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a photo of the first Wisdom Guardians meeting. "It was just the three of us, you, me, and Madison. And now we have over 50 full-time staff and hundreds of volunteers," Tyler noted, flipping through the album. "And look at this one." Dorothy showed a photo of Mrs. Jenkins giving a talk to a group of seniors. "Remember when she was completely lost and confused? And now she's one of our most requested speakers. And this?" She pointed to a photo of Richard cutting a ribbon at the opening of the gambling addiction treatment center the NGO had started. "Who would have thought he'd become one of our greatest assets?" Tyler studied the photo carefully. "You know what impresses me most about these pictures?" "What?" "How everyone looks genuinely happy, not forced happiness, the happiness of people who found purpose." "That's true. And you, Tyler, do you feel happy?" "Very happy, Mrs. Williams. Very happy. Even with all the responsibility, all the challenges." especially because of the responsibility and challenges. My grandmother always said, true happiness comes from knowing your life makes a difference. Dorothy closed the album and looked at Tyler with maternal warmth. Your life definitely makes a difference, son. Our life makes a difference, he corrected. All of us together. All of us together, she agreed. That night, for the first time in months, Tyler dreamed of his grandmother. In the dream, she was sitting on the porch of a house he didn't recognize, smiling and knitting something colorful. You're doing well, my dear grandson, she said in the dream. Very well. I miss you, Grandma. I know. But look at what you've built. Look at how many people you've helped. Look at how many children now have hope because of your work. Sometimes it's hard, Grandma. Sometimes I feel too young for so much responsibility. Age has nothing to do with wisdom, Tyler. You've always known that. And remember, you're not alone. There are so many good people by your side. That's true. And remember, too, that your mission isn't to save everyone. Your mission is to do what you can, the best way you can, every day. The rest, you leave to God. I understand, Grandma. Now tell me something. Are you happy? Are you making time to be a child, too? Tyler smiled in the dream. I am, Grandma. Mrs. Dorothy makes me play video games for at least an hour every day. And on weekends, we always go to the beach or the movies. That's good. It's important to balance work and fun. And you? How are things where you are? His grandmother smiled, a smile full of peace. I'm well, dear. Very well. And I'm so proud of you. Tyler woke up the next morning with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. It was as if his grandmother had truly visited to give her approval to the path he'd chosen. During breakfast, he told Dorothy about the dream. I think she wanted me to know that everything's okay, that I can be at peace with the choices I've made. Of course you can, Tyler. You turned a personal tragedy into a force for good. Your grandmother has every reason to be proud. And you, Mrs. Dorothy? Do you regret changing your life so drastically? Dorothy looked out the window at the ocean, thinking about the question. Tyler, I spent 68 years of my life accumulating money and property. I thought it would give me happiness, security, meaning, but in the end I was alone and empty. She turned to look at him. In the last 2 years, working with you and everyone else at the NGO, I finally understood what a life with purpose means. No, I don't regret it one bit. Even knowing you could be traveling the world, relaxing, enjoying retirement. Especially knowing that, because now I know the difference between being busy and being alive. And for the first time in my life, I'm truly alive. Tyler smiled. My grandmother would be happy to hear that. Why? Because she always said a person's greatest wealth is the number of lives they can touch in a positive way. Then we're rich, aren't we? We're millionaires, Mrs. Dorothy. True millionaires. As they finished breakfast, planning another day of work at the Wisdom Guardians, neither of them could have imagined their conversation was being overheard by Madison, who had arrived early and was waiting in the living room. When they joined her, Madison was grinning from ear to ear. Sorry for eavesdropping, but you just gave me the best idea for our next campaign. What idea? Tyler asked. True Millionaires. A campaign about how real wealth lies in helping others. We could use testimonials from all the people we've helped who are now helping others. Dorothy brightened. And we could show how one small action, like a boy warning an elderly woman about danger, can create waves of positive change that spread through society. Exactly, Madison said, and we could use it to recruit more volunteers, especially older people who think it's too late to make a difference. Tyler nodded enthusiastically. It's never too late to start helping others. Mrs. Jenkins is proof of that. And Richard, too, Dorothy added. It proves it's never too late to change and start doing the right thing. Then it's decided, Madison said. We'll launch the True Millionaires campaign. But first, Tyler reminded them, we need to handle that case about scams targeting retirees in Brooklyn that came in yesterday. True, Dorothy agreed. The work never stops, does it? And thank God for that, Tyler replied. Imagine if there ever came a day when no one needed help anymore. It would be wonderful and sad at the same time, Madison observed. Wonderful because it would mean no one is in danger anymore. Sad because it would mean we've lost our purpose. Don't worry, Dorothy said, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. There will always be people who need help, and there will always be people willing to help. That's how the world works. And we'll be here to connect them, Tyler concluded. Forever? Madison asked. Forever, Tyler and Dorothy answered in unison. As they prepared for another day of work, protecting the elderly and transforming lives, the sun rose over the San Francisco Bay, illuminating a city where 3 people had discovered that true wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you give. Across town, Mrs. Jenkins was getting ready for another speaking engagement. Richard was reviewing the final chapters of his book on gambling addiction recovery, and hundreds of seniors woke up a little safer, knowing there were young people dedicated to protecting them. And in a modest home in Brooklyn, a 75-year-old woman who had nearly fallen victim to a phone scam the week before smiled as she read a message on her phone. Mrs. Rose, this is Tyler from the Wisdom Guardians, confirming our visit today at 2 p.m. for the digital safety workshop. We can't wait to meet you. The cycle continued. Goodness kept spreading. And somewhere, a grandmother who had once taught a young boy that true wealth lies in helping others smiled proudly, knowing her lesson had grown into a movement that would change thousands of lives. The end. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this story of transformation and hope? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you know an older adult who could benefit from scam prevention tips, share this story with them. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring tales like this one. Your participation motivates us to keep bringing you heartwarming stories that spark reflection.